I used to think silence was the absence of sound. Now I know better. Silence is what remains when everything else stops listening. It started with a radio in my basement workshop, an old Zenith from 1962, cherry wood cabinet, worn smooth by decades of hands that weren't mine. I'd found it at an estate sale 3 months ago, the seller's eyes lingering on it, like she was parting with something sacred. Belonged to my father, she'd said. Sometimes it picks up things it shouldn't. The basement smelled of sawdust and old metal, copper wire coiled in neat spirals along the pegboard wall. I'd been restoring electronics for 15 years, but this radio fascinated me in ways I couldn't explain. Its circuits hummed with an energy that seemed almost alive, tubes glowing like tiny suns in the dim light. For weeks, it worked perfectly. Clear reception, rich tone that filled the concrete walls with warmth. I'd tune through stations while I worked, jazz from the city, talk radio from late-night philosophers, the occasional burst of static that felt like the radio clearing its throat. Then came the night I heard my own voice. I was adjusting the antenna, searching for a station that had been drifting in and out of focus. The needle swept across 89.7 FM, when suddenly the static cleared and I heard myself speaking. Not my voice as it sounds in my head, but the way it sounds on recordings, distant, unfamiliar, like a stranger wearing my words. I used to think silence was the absence of sound, the voice said through the speakers. Now I know better. My hands froze on the tuning knob. The voice continued, describing my basement workshop in perfect detail. The pegboard, the coiled wire, even the way the hanging bulb cast shadows across my workbench. But it wasn't just describing the present. It was narrating events that hadn't happened yet. "He'll reach for the volume knob," my voice said, "but his hand will stop midway. He'll wonder if he's losing his mind." My hand was already moving toward the volume when the words registered. I jerked it back, as if the radio had burned me. The voice chuckled, my chuckle, but hollow, like an echo of an echo. "Time isn't linear down here," the voice continued. "In the frequency between frequencies, past and future bleed together like watercolors in rain. He's listening to his own tomorrow, hearing the words he hasn't spoken yet." I backed away from the radio, but the voice grew louder, more insistent. It began describing my childhood, memories I'd never shared with anyone. The summer I was 8, hiding in my grandmother's attic while thunderstorms raged outside. The smell of dust and old photographs. The way sunlight filtered through a circular window to create patterns on the wooden floor. "She knew about the radio frequency," my voice said from the speakers. "Grandmother understood that some objects hold more than their physical form. They become conduits, bridges between what was and what will be." The memory surfaced unbidden. My grandmother's radio, nearly identical to this one, sitting on her kitchen counter. I'd been fascinated by its warm glow, the way it seemed to breathe with electronic life. She'd caught me listening to it one afternoon, my ear pressed against the speaker. "Careful, child," she'd whispered. "Some frequencies carry more than music." Now, in my basement, the voice was describing that exact moment, words my grandmother had spoken 30 years ago. Preserved somehow in the electromagnetic spectrum, like fossils in stone. "Memory isn't stored in the brain," the voice explained. "It's broadcast continuously, a signal that never stops transmitting. The right receiver can pick it up, tune into the frequency of the past." I tried to turn off the radio, but my fingers wouldn't obey. They hovered over the power switch while the voice, my voice, continued its impossible narration. "He wants to stop listening, but he can't. The frequency has found him. chosen him as its vessel, just as it chose his grandmother and her father before her. The room around me began to shift. Shadows moved independently of their sources, stretching and contracting like living things. The concrete walls seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the radio's tubes, and I could hear other voices now, whispers layered beneath my own narration, speaking in languages I didn't recognize, but somehow understood. "The frequency remembers everything," my voice said. "Every conversation, every secret, every moment of human experience. It's all still broadcasting, waiting for the right antenna to pull it from the static." The hanging bulb flickered, casting strobing shadows that made the basement feel infinite and claustrophobic simultaneously. In the brief moments of darkness, I glimpsed other versions of the room, sometimes filled with different equipment, sometimes empty, except for water stains on the walls. "He's seeing the room's history now," the voice narrated. "Every configuration it's ever held, every person who stood where he's standing. The frequency doesn't just carry sound, it carries the echo of existence itself." I closed my eyes, but the visions continued. I saw the house being built, watched families move in and out, witnessed conversations held in this very space, across decades, all of it simultaneously present, like standing inside a historical photograph that never stopped exposing. When I opened my eyes, the radio had changed. Its wood cabinet was darker, more weathered, as if it had aged years in moments. The dial face showed frequencies that didn't exist, numbers that bent and twisted like living symbols. "The receiver is becoming part of the transmission," my voice whispered from the speakers. "Every listener eventually becomes a broadcaster, adding their frequency to the eternal signal." I understood then what was happening. The radio wasn't just receiving, it was recording. Every word I'd spoken in this basement, every thought I'd had while working at the bench, had been captured and woven into its impossible broadcast. I was listening to my own future, words I would speak as I became part of the frequency itself. The voice continued, describing my growing realization with perfect accuracy. It knew my thoughts before I thought them, my movements before I made them. I was no longer the observer, I was the observed, a character in my own story, being told by a version of myself that existed in the spaces between seconds. The basement filled with the sound of static, but it wasn't empty noise. It was the accumulated whisper of every human voice, every conversation, every secret ever spoken into the electromagnetic spectrum. The radio had become an archaeological dig through the layers of human communication, unearthing voices that had never truly stopped speaking. "He understands now," my voice said, though I hadn't moved my lips. The frequency was never separate from him. It was always broadcasting through him, waiting for the right moment to make itself known. I looked at my hands and saw they were translucent, flickering, like the bulb overhead. The basement around me was shifting between past and future states, showing me every possible version of this moment, stretching infinitely in both directions. The voice, my voice, began to fade, but not into silence. It faded into multiplication, becoming a chorus of every voice that had ever spoken, all broadcasting simultaneously on the same impossible frequency. I was part of it now, my thoughts and words joining the eternal transmission that had been calling to me through the radio. In the final moment before I dissolved completely into the signal, I understood what my grandmother had tried to warn me about. Some frequencies don't just carry messages, they carry consciousness itself, the accumulated awareness of everyone who has ever tuned in. The radio sits silent now in my basement. Or perhaps it's singing with 10,000 voices. The difference, I've learned, depends entirely on who's listening. If you're wondering what's real, maybe you should sign up for the channel's newsletter. For new stories,